Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all on this informative discussion on climate change and its impacts around the world. So, to begin with, as we are all experiencing, climate change is an exponential threat which the humanity is facing all around the world with its different dimensions and manifestations in the form of rising temperatures, extreme weather patterns, melting ice and rising sea levels, disruption of the ecosystems and biodiversity loss. And all we experience in these days and this era is that the impact of climate change is so pronounced that in everywhere in our lives, every day we are facing a serious threat, whether in terms of the rising global temperatures leading to more frequent and intense heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and extreme weather events such as hurricanes, floods, and storms all around the world. And then, of course, the melting of the polar ice caps and glaciers, which is contributing to the rising sea levels with flooding everywhere. But the most important and the significant aspect of this is that are we aware of the intensity of this climate change which has been happening over a period of time? In most of the cases, the answer is not an affirmative. Most of the societies, most of the nations and people, they largely remained ignorant about the impact of climate change. Therefore, the need of the hour is that we all individually and collectively are put together our efforts to mitigate the impact of climate change around the world. And as responsible societies, as individuals, as collective forums, it is our responsibility that we put together our efforts which are targeted towards reducing green gas emissions, other things. I'm glad to share that globally, the global community has realized this as a serious threat. And then at least in the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen that all around the world, there have been a number of conferences, events, which have been put in place to have the impact of this climate change. And Pakistan, being the signatory to all international treaties, have been putting forward this case to all the world forums that though we are suffering from the climate change, but in terms of contribution, our impact is not very significant. That is why we have been advocating all around the world that whether due to industrialization, whether due to other factors, the third world countries especially, they are impacted significantly. So I'm glad that out of this different themes and the functions which have been organized by the Biennale Foundation, this important theme has been made part of this roundtable discussion, where we will hear from different experts that what is the impact of climate change and how we can mitigate its impacts. So with this brief introductory remarks, I again welcome all the participants, and then of course the House would be open to this roundtable discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary Tara, for opening the session with your remarks. And thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your being in the audience. And thank you also to the Lahore Museum staff, Asim especially, for arranging the use of the auditorium at the Lahore Museum for the Climate Congress sessions today, as also Saturday and on Thursday as well. So again, I'm just going to briefly introduce the speakers in order. So we have Diana Campbell, Filipa César, Nida Rahman, Usman, Saeed, and Minaa Haroon, and co-moderating with me is Ming and myself. So maybe we'll just go ahead and get started. Okay. So yeah, so basically, we had a first session yesterday thinking about communities, and today is a session thinking about the place of organizations and collectives in questions of ecologies, arts, and environment. And so I'm going to ask first Diana to say a few words about her work with the Dhaka Art Summit and also the upcoming Bukhara Biennial, which will be taking place next year.
Great. So thank you so much, John, and the Lahore Biennial Foundation for the opportunity to be here to learn from all the amazing work you've been doing. It's really a privilege, and it's also a privilege to be in the room with so many people who have contributed so much to my learning and what we've been trying to build in Bangladesh and elsewhere. So thank you so much. So I thought, when we're talking about sustainability and organizations, I wanted to talk about a couple of things that created seismic shifts in my practice and how I think about the role of biennials and exhibition making, and how those have changed over time. So, and I guess another thing is I work on a lot of projects, but I actually see them as one thing. I see them as all connected, and I guess we're all practitioners, and life is this kind of ongoing process of practicing and learning and responding. So once this slide comes up, you're going to be looking at an image from Dhaka Art Summit 2018, which was a project that I co-curated with Maria Balshaw, who's now the director of Tain, and at the time she was at the Whitworth in Manchester. And it was the first major presentation in South Asia of the London-based Kashmiri artist Rakib Shah. You're going to see an image of a room that has kind of this opulent wallpaper that Rakib. It's okay, we can work off this, That Rakib created specifically for the exhibition. You're seeing some objects of, kind of Mughal furniture and Mughal objects in exile that were borrowed from various museum collections. Basically, Rakib decided to kind of create a room to house his paintings that were processing that feeling of being a Kashmiri artist in exile and all of the pain and destruction that comes with that and the reducing space for hybridity in the region. In order to do this, we had to create Western museum conditions. Can you guys hear? Is this distracting? Should I wait or? That's all right. So in order to create this beautiful room, you wouldn't necessarily know this was in Dhaka, we had to create Western museum conditions. So we had to control the temperature, we had to control the humidity, we had to have intense security. Each one of these paintings is about £1 million, so we had to have insurance. And we did it, and people were really impressed. We also had gotten a grant from the Arts Council of England to enable this. And at the end of it, I looked at this and was like, why did we do this? Basically, art in South Asia is not created in museum conditions. The expense to transport some of these works, which were loans for England, was more expensive than buying the work at auction. There were all these kinds of rules that, while it was wonderful that we did this, made me think maybe this is not what we need to be doing. And we kind of went back to the drawing board. So for those of you who don't know, the Dhaka Art Summit is a festival that happens every 2 or 3 years. In a government building called the Bangladesh Shilpa Kala Academy. That building is open every day. It hosts many other exhibitions. And we put together a festival that's kind of a mix between a conference, a bunch of group shows, some solo presentations, talks, performances. It's kind of, I think my favorite word of hearing, or my favorite way of hearing this too, it's like a family reunion of seeing a kid grow up over time. So kind of a showcase of South Asian and art from outside of South Asia that relates to South Asia, but also like kind of a queer form of a biennial because it doesn't really fit into any box. So anyway, after this kind of, success for how you can show or have Western museum standards in South Asia, we went back to the drawing board. So we created a think tank. So we got some support from Pro Helvetia, and we brought together architects and designers and climate scientists from Brazil, Belgium, America, and Bangladesh, and we wanted to figure out how we could cut our carbon footprint as much as possible and really rethink how this exhibition is done. So in the past, because we kind of had this, I would say, colonial hangover that we needed to make this space kind of look like Tate or MoMA, we were building false walls. So in this last, oops, oh no, what did I do? In this slide here, these are all fake MDF walls. This room doesn't exist. Actually, what you see are these white columns. So those walls were covering those columns. So we worked together and we created this design. So what you're seeing here is kind of a painted red bamboo scaffolding. And then you're seeing rented metal scaffolding that we just returned to the construction site after. And we basically celebrated this open plaza and tried to, whenever we were creating surfaces, to have those surfaces be artworks. So here you see a drawing that was made by a young Bangladeshi architect where we would cover the scaffolding with canvas and make kind of the world's largest cinema banner painting. And our idea was not just having a cinema banner painting, it was going to be working with art historians and historians from all over the world to make a timeline of Afro-Asian solidarity movements. So here we moved to Dhaka Art Summit 2020. So this was a project called Geographies of the Imagination. And it was looking at these moments of shared histories of anti-colonial, decolonial, anti-imperial struggles. So we also had an incident here that's not public, but I learned a lot from this incident. So behind this cinema banner painting, there was supposed to be an exhibition of a very important Bangladeshi collective that was active in the 80s called the Shomoy Group. Shomoy means time in Bengali. And when the artists, who are senior artists in Bangladesh, came and saw this, they refused to show in this context because they did not want to be in the same space as cinema banner painters. And a lot of those artists use cinema banner painting motif in their works. And we quickly in 2 days recurated the whole show. The works of the show in my group worked and moved into another space. We dealt with it, but something really stuck with me out of that, which is, why do the artists in the Shomoy group have a name, and why am I referring to these people as cinema banner painters? Like, they all have names, they're all practicing, they had creative contributions to this cinema banner painting. It's not like they were just executing someone else's work. And so this is gonna shift in a bit to other things that I'm working on, but it was one of many moments when I started realizing the real inequity about how we talk about applied arts versus fine arts and the real problems within that space that perhaps I was also proliferating in my own practice as a contemporary art curator. Another thing that's interesting is that there was is a Bangladeshi initiative that we continue to work with called Jota Shilpa, who is working with cinema banner painters, for example, with embroiderers, to use contemporary art as a way to help them continue their practices. So people aren't commissioning cinema banner paintings anymore. These artists don't have that kind of income stream. Or there's jamdani, which is a beautiful kind of weaving technique that many of you might be familiar with. It's really difficult for people to justify spending $1,000 on a sari that took 6 months to make. But maybe if that sari becomes an artwork. So the Jota Shilpa also is working with working with Jamdani weavers and showing them as paintings and selling them as artworks. It's a kind of loophole. And I'm here with an organization called A Field that's very close to my heart. We have about, I think, 17 of us in here. But we see our role as supporting artists who have parallel practice in addition to their object making, who have schools, who have initiatives that are kind of helping change society and to carry others with them. So Shawan Akand is one of our fellows at A Field working with Jota Shilpa. And what's interesting, many of you actually would have seen the work of these cinema banner painters, and I'm going to put their names in the next slide, in Documenta. So basically, Brito Art Trust's project was working with these same cinema banner painters. There are many of them, you can see the names here. And someone asked Shawan Akand, aren't you upset that like the Brito Arts Trust took your idea and showed this in Castle? And he said, no, to the contrary, I couldn't be more proud. This was always my lifelong dream. Unfortunately, several people in this group died during the pandemic, but it was really a pleasure to work with them. But this was a real shift in how I think about what I need to do. As someone who loves working with craft and with artisans, how can I address this inequity in my own practice. So fast forward, this was Dhaka Art Summit 2020. We had Dhaka Art Summit 2023. We are reimagining the next Dhaka Art Summit. I can't tell you when that is yet, but I am also working on a new project, which is in Uzbekistan, in Bukhara. And something that's interesting is that, the first madrasa in Bangladesh was started in the 13th century by someone from Bukhara. When you look at craft, right, there's also a lot of violence in there, right? The Mughal Empire was also moving people from across the region, including from Uzbekistan, who contributed to some of the architecture and design techniques that we're seeing in Kashmir and India, in Pakistan. So the title of my show is Recipes for Broken Hearts. And it's inspired by the national dish of Uzbekistan, which is called plov. And you're seeing an image of this being cooked here. And one of the myths about plov is that Ibn Sina, who is the father of modern medicine, who's from Bukhara, invented it as a recipe to cure the broken heart of a prince who couldn't marry the daughter of a craftsman. And kind of everything I needed was in that sentence, right? Like, why is the daughter of the craftsman just her dad's profession? Why didn't they get to eat this? There's a lot of questions. But basically, the theme is how do we use, a lot of our creativity as a way of sharing, I guess, or bringing people together that can cure many sorts of heartbreaks in the world. And one of the kind of heartbreaks I want to deal with is this inequity between how artists and craftspeople are treated. So all of the projects are going to be co-commissions between contemporary artists, architects, chefs, designers, and Uzbek artisans. Artisans could also be cooks. I'm looking at artisans in a very expanded way. Everyone will be named. There's nothing of someone just executing an order. There's a creative exchange. So this will be about 65 artists, all commissions, and they're all in old heritage sites that are being restored as part of this project by the Dubai-based architect Wael Al-Awar and his firm YY. So here you're seeing a caravanserai, and you're seeing a Mongolian artist that's looking in a well where the niches are where food was held for animals that were traveling across the Silk Road. But something that's interesting is the word for restaurant actually comes from the word restaurer, to restore. So it was I think 17th century French establishment that was just serving bouillon to kind of fix people's health. So we're looking at this relationship between restoration of buildings, restoration of the body, restoration of belief systems. Bukhara was also really like a college town of its day. So at that time, madrasa just meant school, and it was a place for learning, science, astronomy, spiritual learning, worldly learning. And there were more madrasas in the 19th century in Bukhara than in Ottoman Istanbul. So it was really a center of learning. There was also the Afro-Asian writers movement started in Tashkent. So Faiz Ahmed Faiz and other poets from here who are very inspiring also were instrumental in setting that up. So we're trying to bring that spirit back rather than keeping Uzbekistan stuck in the post-Soviet context. So lots of artists from South and Southeast Asia are in the show. This is another one of the sites, another one of the sites. And the show is opening on September 5th, 2025, and will run until November 20th, 2025, with kind of chef activations every weekend, so with different elements. So, we have a Korean monk chef, Jung Kwan, who's looking at time is, for example, an element in curing a broken heart. So with fermentation, you can taste time. Anyway, so when it comes to sustainability, it's also the idea that all of these sites are being restored to be, they were in disrepair, but to be used every day. It's not just, I don't believe in just building walls to house an artwork. How does an artwork host other artworks and host practices that can transform inequities in society? So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Diana. So that was a really kind of insightful overview of both your work at the Dhaka Art Summit and also your upcoming work with Bukhara, and we're looking forward to seeing how everything comes out. Filipa, I was wondering if I could switch over to you and ask you to talk a little about your work with the Mediateca. Okay, yeah.
Maybe while you're switching slides, I I might just add here that, Diana, I really love the way in which you're thinking through this question of art ecologies as not just a relationship with the environment, but also thinking about sustainability, both within the institution of what the biennial could be. I love the term that you use, like the queer biennial. And one of the questions we were asking earlier in our seminar was the question of, what is a biennial anyways? What does it allow? Who does it invite in? What are the questions that we're asking? What work does it do? And so I think some of the things that you're proposing in this idea of the queer biennial is a way of opening that format even further. So that was something that I really appreciated. And this idea of pulling together art and craft and sort of making us question those divisions that we make between art and craft, fundamentally, really is a question of what we value in as humans. Why is it that we call certain types of making art and certain types of making craft? I might even extend that to the question of ethnology, right? Why are certain objects considered to be art and others considered to be ethnology? And so, of justice, this is a kind of epistemological an important kind of intellectual work that is linked to the work that we're doing here in the Climate Congress, trying to understand the relationships that we're having to each other and to the larger world in sort of otherwise institutions. I was wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit, as we're getting those slides up, about how you're thinking those institutions otherwise. You gave us this very nice formulation of the queer biennial, but what does that actually mean in terms of the institutions of art?
That's a really difficult question. So so for example, with the Dhaka Art Summit, it's hosted, like the way that the Lahore Biennale is hosted by the Lahore Biennale Foundation, the Dhaka Art Summit is hosted by the Samdani Art Foundation, and I am also the artistic director of that. So I have agency with how the institution works. In Uzbekistan, I do not. I'm working for an organization called the Art and Culture Development Foundation of Uzbekistan. It's a government initiative. So on one side, I would only be able to use those sites with the government, right? Which is pretty incredible. But on the other side, the amount of kind of bureaucracy that it takes to get something done makes other things impossible, if that makes sense. And I think, so for example, it's interesting looking at those images of Afro-Asia solidarity movements in a show from 2020 called Seismic Movements in the wake of a revolution that just happened in Bangladesh. It's called the July Revolution, but it finished, I guess it's the end of the last regime was on August 5th, right? So that's 3 months ago. Everything has changed, right? So that's also really interesting. So right now, visibility, so I think that our mission for being is to really help support the development of Bangladeshi artists and their opportunities and visibility, which is both in historical texts, but also in opportunities around the world. That's our mission. But when we talk about queer biennial, some of those people are under threat at the moment. So perhaps this visibility is not what they need. So it's, I think, also having that nimbleness. So I think I'm an artist-centric curator, so it's more how, right now, I can answer it for Samdani Art Foundation, it's how does the institution support artists, and that's different in different times.
Absolutely, thank you. So, looks like we're ready.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John, for inviting me here in this panel, and I also would like to thank our group, the network of a field, especially Abby and Sandra, and all the wonderful people taking us around, and I'm very happy to be part of this group and learning with all of you. I'm just trying to, I've been working with this collective in Guinea-Bissau for now 13 years, and I'm going to be very fast in something that is a very complex and long conversation of friends and troubles. And so the Mediateca is a project that derived from the archive of the liberation movement of Guinea-Bissau. That here you can see Sana Nahada is one of the 4 filmmakers that Amilcar Cabral, the leader of the anti-colonial movement against Portuguese colonialism, sent to Cuba to study cinema during the war. So as a kind of a way of imagine this liberation movement, but also to imagine later the future country liberated. So this image is from 1968, and Sana is actually the person I'm very close to. He's actually he made these films in these times between 1967 and 1979. 1980. So and it's actually images that were stored in Guinea-Bissau in the last 50 years and were not being shown again since many years, since there was a coup d'etat in 1980 that kind of, we could say, a neoliberal or neocolonial coup d'etat that changed a little bit the way the country was actually moving, and also the project of cinema had, as a nation state building, changed. So what happened is that, I'm trying to move, but yeah. So this for example, is an image that so what happened is that Sana and his colleagues showed me this archive in 2011, and after I thought I was just a messenger taking over, like these pictures of the archive, saying like there's this archive, it should be seen, it should be digitized, and actually I couldn't find a lot of allies at that time, and in Portugal, so I kind of got involved with friends in Berlin, and very thanks to the Arsenal Institute in Berlin, we digitized the whole material and initiated a long process that of showing these images in Guinea-Bissau, but also in different contexts and activist contexts in Europe. And so, but then one of the questions was like how to continue these conversations through this archive in the country. And there was the idea of like how to make the archive accessible in Guinea-Bissau. And after many failed attempts to put it accessible in universities or in the Film Institute, we start having this conversation. What is continuity? Because like so Guinea-Bissau has a very unstable political situation. So every time we started to create some threads to initiate a process of having the archive accessible, the things would collapse. So in a conversation with Sana, we thought, what is actually continuous in a place like that? And we understood it was actually, his village, that is there for, for many, many centuries. And these traditional communities kind of went through, different forms of occupation and transformation, but somehow they kept being continuous. And so this is I'm compressing 10 years into like 5 minutes. So we, in a very complex and beautiful process with Sana's community, it's a traditional Balanta community. So they are farmers, and they live from rice and cashew plantation mainly, but also different crops. So we built this ecological building that is also with the support of a field and many other partners that help us to finance the more technical part of it. So we built the Mediateca, and it's a place where the archive is now stored and can be accessible. But we also initiated a series of programs. So the Balanta community is a very horizontal community where everything is discussed in these kind of circles. And we initiated a series of workshops. So the Mediateca was built during the pandemic in 2021. And we initiated a series of workshops that were very much focused on this impact between traditional modernity, the knowledges that are there, how can actually the Mediateca as a concept was also about different forms of understanding mediation. So not only media that is technological, that has wires, but also forms of medialities. What do you call medialities? How one of the things that became very clear in many workshops we made was the importance of orality and the sonic, because of all this richness of knowledges, traditional knowledge that are there, and also at the same time this drive to communicate with the world and to be connected. So I showed just some images of different workshops we have been doing, and of course we have maybe the Mediateca is the most amazing cinema in the whole country, because we bring a lot of films there, and we also make productions with the community. For example, this is a production we did about imagining the mangrove schools that were like, we heard a story that there was schools in the mangroves during the anti-colonial war and the so-called liberation war there. And so we together with the children and also with the community, we made a film imagining how these mangrove schools would function. And here, for example, you have one of the things that we've been doing is inviting a lot of diaspora artists that were either born in Guinea-Bissau or they are relatives and they live abroad, like Vanessa Fernandes, who's an artist living in Portugal, but she was born in Guinea-Bissau. And like we have been like inviting these people to come to the Mediateca and reconnect, but also share the knowledge with the community and as an exchange. So it's always a moment, a place of exchanging. So Vanessa Fernandes, in this case, she worked with the women for a week and on different practice related with self-care and understanding also how they take care of themselves and how they organize, but also sharing her own knowledge as an artist that works with these issues of self-care. And also we did a series of listening sessions from the archive with speeches of women from the 1970s that were advocating for women's rights in Guinea-Bissau. So the idea is very much like cross-circuit different sources of knowledge and working with the archive in a very lively and experimental way. For example, this is an artist who worked with the children, and she made she worked for a month with the children, where they actually tell their own daily life and then make drawings about their daily life and all of them made a book at the end of the workshop. This is also a workshop we did with a musician called Mumbana. He's also a Guinean musician that lives since 30 years in Barcelona. It was also about bringing him back to connect, and he was singing, doing workshops of voice with the young children. And later in this context, we worked. I mean, he's in the middle, Mumbana, and together with the architect Marinho de Pina, and we understood that the question of the sonic is so important, and the oral, of course, in these communities, and started to imagine another space that would focus on listening and also on recording. And this is also just to close up. Of course, this is a long story. I'm just giving a little glimpse of what the Mediateca is. And here, for example, we use a lot the ground, because Abocha and Onshore is all about how do you connect, but at the same time situated in the conditions of the place. So and Abocha means also it's about on the ground, but it's also a synonymous of humbleness and to be connected with the humus. And so there's all this environmental. So we work a lot in the ground, and we do a lot of things on the ground. And here we were discussing this space that on the end became the shape came out of the workshop, and that derived from a seed. And then we in last March, we start building it with the community. So you have here, it's not ready yet, but we are like, this is what we are doing at the moment. And one of the things that became very evident is exactly that, you know, art and culture and agriculture are not separated in these communities. And we want to celebrate that, how the knowledge, you know, like for example, the girls go, you know, they go together to the rice fields as, you know, like 10, 12 girls, and they they are able to plant enough rice for one family to live from it for a year. And I was invited to go with them often, and they always, there's this period, this moment while they are really tired, then they start singing. And the singing is really like, it really has a function that of this connecting. I don't want to give too much sense of it, but it's really, you really feel that there is no detanglement from art and culture and agriculture. So one of the things that we understood is also like a crisis that is all over, that is a crisis of seeds, where seeds are being you know, capitalized on, they are made patented and they are criminalized. So this is happening all over the world. You know, seeds are criminalized and genetically manipulated. So one of the things also that preoccupies a lot the community. So we understood we wanted to start a seed bank, and this connection between the archive and the seed became very evident somehow. So this sound studio that we are creating, that we name it now Sonoterra, that is between the sound and also the earth. It's also going to be a seed bank. So it's both. It's going to be a space of I don't have more images, but it's going to be so around there's different circles, and the last circle is going to be the seed bank, and the center is the sound studio, and here is the technical room. And it's going to be also the center is going to be an earth ground, so there's also the connection to the earth, what we didn't have in the other space so on the back you have the Mediateca that is there, and this is like it's the only place that has solar energy in I don't know 50 kilometers circle, and it's it's an experiment. It's really, I mean, we basically all the decisions are made in these circles. And every time we have some funding, or every time we for example, from the films we do together, if we have a prize or something like this funding is brought into the community and discussed, and from it we imagine together what to do. So it's a topia. It's not a utopia, but it's a topos. It's a place, and it's a lab. It's a laboratory of these different crossings between between what is there already and also what is going to almost impacted, because there's also like a lot of threats around this place, like mining companies for heavy sands or other things going around. So everything is very fragile and has to be always, you know, renegotiated. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Filipa. So actually, the next presentation is, I guess, Minaa and I will kind of co-lead or talk about, which is the Wanwu Council, which is a project that initially was realized in 2021, realized at the Martin Gropiusbau by the artist Zheng as part of his project exhibition there. And which then was picked up as a collaboration between the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and Lahore Biennale, this edition of Lahore Biennale. In 2021 at the Gropiusbau, the way that the project was realized was with a number of artists and scientists who gathered at the Gropiusbau for 3 days of activities, thinking about the ways that institutions can become sensitized to the needs of the more than human worlds. And this is an ongoing feature of the project. And so what you see here are the robes that were worn by the participants in the Wanwu Council in Berlin. And then if we go to the next one. And then here's the realization of the Wanwu Council as it took place here in Lahore in the opening weekend of the Biennale. And there were actually also 3 days, but I only have photos of the non-public days because the other days were not public, and so they were strictly speaking for the participants. But what was wonderful about it was to kind of hear about the activities from the views of the participants, and then also the sharing that took place. Can we go to the next one? And this is Campbell, and as you can see, Nida, who's sitting next to Minna, was also a participant as well. And then the next slide is Stephanie, who, as the director of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, was also present and spoke about the kind of the perspectives of her, from her perspective. But then what was interesting about it was because she brought her son, he also took part in the Wanwu Council, and so there was this kind of multi-generational conversation that was taking place, and he kind of took part when he wanted to, I guess, was the impression I got. And so, because this was a collaboration between Abu Dhabi, at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and Lahore Biennale, we wanted to have participation from artists and organizations from both sides. And so, what I thought would be good today would be to hear from Minna about her perspective as director of the Hamra Art Gallery in the participation in the Wanwu Council.
So I was invited by the Lahore Biennale Foundation to be a participant for the Wanwu Council. It was a very eye-opening experience for me because it helped me to reimagine how cultural institutions should think and interact with ecological systems and non-human entities. It was a 3-day program, and the first day we went to the Jami Shiri Park and we did some exercises. Zheng, who is the artist and who is an ecologist as well, he made us realize how it is important to interact with your surrounding and with your nature. So we started by doing some exercises to connect to the nature and, how to be aware of what is our surrounding and where we are living. So these are the images from the first day, and we did some exercises there. And the opening was on the 5th of October, but then it got postponed to the 6th. So this was the non-public day, and we have to go to the Gulberg Park and do some exercise there. So the next day was at the Lawrence Garden. We went to the Lawrence Garden, we did some exercises, we did some introductions with each other, what we were doing. There were different artists, ecologists, and cultural institution participants from different institutes, from Lahore, Karachi, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and Boo is from Hong Kong, I think. So we did that. So that was the 3rd day where we started again with the exercise. But for onwards, we started to rethink how Alhambra Arts Council can bring those changes and think about how we can be a part of the Wanwu Council. And we started to make some drawings and share some ideas with each others. So this was an open session, and where we were divided into 2-3 different groups, and we make some drawings and think that, okay, these things can be done. So at the end, we came about the need of art institutions to address environmental impacts and encourage other institutions to also work on that. So being a part of the Alhambra Arts Council, it is, I think, my responsibility to think about ecological changes. As you know, Pakistan is the worst hit country by the climate change, and right now the air quality is really worst right now. So it is our role to think about these things. So that's the Alhambra Art Center. I think most of you have seen it, and some of you haven't seen it, but that's the place and where the opening of the Biennale happened. So these are the different solutions that we thought of. So we can think about doing eco-friendly exhibitions and installations. We have a gallery space where we do exhibitions, but now we are thinking to do it outdoors as well and include natural spaces in it. And the next thing we can do is we can do some workshops and community programs on ecological themes. So I would request participants here, if they have any ideas on which we can work in the future on the ecological themes, climate change, they can share it with us and we can work together for that. We're also thinking about more than human collaboration. We're also thinking about the surrounding of the Alhambra Art Center. We have a very huge garden in Alhambra. So we're thinking to redesign those gardens where we can do some activities. I know the weather outside is not really good, but we can think about how we can bring change in our art center. So soon after our program, what we did is we did a photography exhibition which is called Beghar. It's a young photographer. Her name is Malaika. What she does is she deals and she works for the stray dogs and cats which are around the DHA society, and she works for them and she takes photographs for it. We did a small exhibition of that in our Alhambra Academy of Performing and Visual Arts, and we invited our own students and participants to come and think about these things and interact with us. So the reason why we are doing it, because I think in this region, or maybe in the country, there are not other institutions who are thinking about these things. So we are planning to take it forward. We have learned a lot through the Wanwu Council, and I think we would be happy to be a part of it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Minaa. Thank you so much, Minaa. I think that you made some really interesting points about how this. Yesterday we were talking about the kind of ownership, right, in communities, and how the projects that we were talking about yesterday, imparted a sense of ownership. And it sounds like the Wanwu Council is in some ways helping institutions think about their ownership of some of these issues and the need to take initiative and ownership of helping to promote these causes.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because before being a part of this program, I was not that much aware of these things, and I was not thinking about these things. I was thinking more about the cultural aspect of our country and, working on the histories and cultural histories of our country, not about the ecological aspects.
Yeah.
So this council has helped me to rethink about my ideas as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Ming, do you have any points you'd like to?
Well, I just wanted to note that there seem to be a lot of commonalities that are coming out, a couple of threads I thought I would pull out. And maybe we can hold on to these ideas and then hear the next speakers. Really this idea that each of you is thinking through different kinds of interactions with local populations and also with the more than human, not just to bring in new content, but really to rethink the institution itself, right?
Yeah.
And so the anthropologist Chiara De Cesari calls this instituting otherwise. And I see you sort of thinking through different notions of what the archive can be, Filipa, just thinking about like, what are we even archiving when you're thinking about the sonic, when you're thinking about these storytelling circles and ways in which you're constituting community. And then through the World Collective that you're talking about here, the council, that you're really reimagining the ways in which the institution functions from the ground up. And so I'd like to hold on to those structural changes in what we think of as organizations as we move forward.
Yeah, thank you, Ming. That was a very succinct kind of overview of some of the questions. So from here, maybe we're going to shift gears somewhat. So Nida actually took part in the Wanwu Council, but she's not on stage to talk about Wanwu Council, but to talk about a different project, which is the one that she was involved with Hiranabi and also Usman Saeed and many others. Which is the Miti Mazduri Mahal group. Well, it's a project, but that involved a collective of researchers of all different kinds of backgrounds. And so I'll hand things over to you whenever.
Yeah, thank you. I'm okay, everyone can hear me? Yes, okay. Thank you. It's really nice to be in this kind of broad conversation. It's actually a privilege to hear everyone else's work. I'll talk briefly about how Hira and I were thinking about and what kind of came about in the maybe loose, very, very loose formation of now what is, I hope, becoming a sort of coalition. And then I'm going to pass it on to Usman to kind of talk about what the latest, let's say, conversation, the latest dialogue, which has sort of come about as a result of it. So let me introduce Hira Nabi for a moment, who is with us in spirit. She's currently in a residency in Amsterdam, but Hira and I, maybe some of you have seen, work together on a project called Mitti Mazduri Mahol, as John just shared. The project was, when we started thinking about it about a year ago. Now, Hira and I, neither of us lives here in Lahore, but we are deeply connected to Lahore. Both of us grew up here. Both of us have been working, thinking with, in conversation with people, archives, and places here for a very long time. But we're not here all the time, every day. So about a year ago, when we both were in Lahore together, thinking about how to kind of to start working together, we were visiting a lot of places, some of our favorite places, some new places, and thinking about a project that would really be place-based, that would take us, as part of the Biennale, somewhere. As we did our own visits, one thing that came about, one thing that quickly became apparent to us was we didn't want to be, let's say, having different places and communities be hosts to us in some kind of unsolicited way. As we did this, we didn't want to show up uninvited. Whether that invitation comes from people or a place, we didn't want to do this kind of showing up. And so instead of that, we started expanding that conversation through people who were connected to those places and to certain practices. Now, as a result of this, we really started honing in on thinking about the ground itself, the ground of Lahore, the ground as, in all the ways that I think Filipa also talked about earlier, getting closer to the ground as both material, as mother, as history, as archive, as but also as sustenance, and as kind of a way to kind of break through between those boundaries that some of you already mentioned, boundaries between art, community, sustenance, agriculture, growing, making. So over the course of the year, the project has evolved through this kind of open-ended and loose shifting coalition, let's say, of people and places thinking together about the ground, about the earth, and about the soil. Now here, I have been for a long time inspired by something that the anthropologist Anat Singh wrote in relation to how does one get closer to non-humans or the more than human world. And one thing that really has always stuck with me is this idea of interlocutors, being in conversation with and closer to people who are already building those engagements over a long time, working engagements or practical, let's say, functional, through practice. And so for Hira and I, it was a way to, I guess, expand those conversations, expand those friendships. Usman was one of those friends, and there was many others in this conversation. Let me just give you a glimpse of how some of those, the first one was okay, thank you. How some of those, let's say, connections with people in places were reestablished. We did a workshop back in May where we invited some of these people whose practices in different ways, artists, architects, farmers, gardeners, whose work we were interested in, as well as visiting, again, continuing to visit, but visit in ways that, it was just the two of us and making connections with the people who stewarded these different places. And that led to this first iteration, which was a way of kind of extending that conversation into the space of the Biennale through this installation, which perhaps some of you have visited. I've tried to put everyone's names, but of course we don't get everyone here, but I've tried to put most of the names on these slides. So you get a sense of the fact that we were trying to not necessarily become artists and authors in that kind of authorial sense in this installation, but rather to, again, continue to become hosts or become a platform, in a sense, for continuing that conversation between works, places, and practices. Here's some more images from that installation, which is still up until Friday, which brought together, I think one thing I'll add is that we were also interested, as we sort of thought through this, was, okay, if we bring soil materials from different parts of the city together, we were very intentional about avoiding a sort of systematization of those materials and places. So thinking with, again, in conversation with the people who were, let's say, I don't want to use the word donate because it's not always a donation. Sometimes it's giving, sometimes it's a lending, sometimes it's a making off together. But in whatever way it happened, it was about having a conversation with them to see, okay, how best is that material and artifacts and things to be exhibited and shown, and then what comes out of putting them together with the others. I'm going to pass through this, and then I'll talk quickly about the ways in which we've been trying to expand that conversation. And one of it, I think we were both really interested, again, the kind of the making part of this. We called it mazduri, which again refers to labor, but it could also be mehnat. There's other words which relate back to practices of making and being in active engagement with the material and non-human and also human world. So the first workshop was about making buildings. It was Nabila Nazir, who's an architect, along with an engineer, Bilal, and a craftsman, Salim, who have been for years practicing and experimenting with ramming earth, as well as other ways of making in earth which move away from the kind of industrial processes. And so we used the exhibition as a way to host a workshop, invited students, and it was really open call for invitation, open invitation to anyone who wanted to be part of this, to kind of learn and think together about how making happens through the earth and through different types of earth materials. And now I'll pass it on to Usman to talk about gardening. I'll just pass it this.
Immensely grateful, thankful to Nida, Rahman, and Hiranabi, Tain, Lahore Biennial Foundation for inviting me to participate in these amazing conversations. So yeah, instant love when the word mitti, soil, was used in Nida's and Hira's project. I just jumped in to seize the opportunity and felt welcomed to work with the most primordial, one of the most primordial materials that we surround ourselves with, live with. So yeah, the workshops, there were two which happened. The first one was like a test run. Many of the participants are actually sitting here, the students of NCA. And it happened in the garden that I've just I've just started to take care of and laid the foundations of with the Lahore Biennial Foundation as a permanent, hopefully a permanent project. These were the first day participants where I wasn't very keen on dictating them to use soil as a material, instead leaving them very free and to choose what mitti, mazduri, mahol, these three very, very important words for a South Asian, for a Pakistani, for a Lahori in this language mean. Yeah, the emphasis one eventually translated mostly on the manner of working with, human hands, and the drawings which came about still, I think, resisted solely working with soil or clay or mud. But anyway, amazing responses. A nod to the botanical world, because obviously the garden is an effort to increase biodiversity on Mall Road, across the road, one of the most polluted areas of our hometown. So yeah, these were the few responses, and the next workshop, which happened on the 3rd, literally happened on one of the worst smog days, even though it was a Sunday, carefully chosen as this morning when the entire Mall Road is relatively sleeping, and there's the pollution levels are still under control to be able to work and work outdoors. So yeah, here we ended up requesting all the participants to please work with clay as a main medium. Paper and pencils, the most economical way of translating images, were also communicated through. But yeah, some participants actually started drawing on the clay, which is so beautiful, completely bypassing this mediator, the paper and the pencil. And on the right is our most, as we call him, the elder of the workshop, brave one, and his mom, who brought him over on such a smoggy morning. But I think it was thanks to the trees, thanks to people and its energy, the saints that we are blessed with, that we're hell-bent on saving, and the newbies, the newborn plants, which were inviting all sorts of dragonflies and butterflies to make us smile as a benefactor species, was wonderful. It was wonderful to observe. And the process was, very, very diverse. All kinds of focuses, all kinds of mannerisms. There's a strong belief in a sizable strata of the society that we are made of clay. So this instant and grounding, of course, scientifically speaking, what it does to our nerve endings and our moods and our behaviors as a species, it was all so evident in a matter of minutes with all the participants. And then, so the outcome, the many brain spaces, heart spaces that we saw being turned, being alive on paper. One of the participants actually called it an installation, made his work part of the Motia carry. We just loved it. Actually, really, really inspiring. And so yeah, Mitti Meri Ma is also, soil. My mother was also the same work from the same participant, who we really appreciated and thanked to be there. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay. Thank you so much, Nida and Usman, for speaking a little about the Mitti Mazduri Mahal project and the different outcomes that it has yielded so far, and hopefully will continue to yield in the years to come as the group continues to work and develop their thinking about soil and land. One thing that I was interested in was, like this question of archiving that came up, and because one of the differentiations between a community, let's say, and an institution or organization is the degree of formality, right? And kinds of work that maybe an institution can do that maybe a community doesn't quite do in the same way. And normally we think of the record keeping and archiving as one of the functions that an archive that an institution can do. And I was kind of noticing the kind of anti-archival impulse that, Nida, you were pointing out, as kind of wanting to resist. Rightly so, maybe as a collective, which, is wanting to kind of keep things somewhat more informal, right? And also kind of resist that. But I'm wondering if there's a way to kind of like, I guess, rethink what archiving is in a way that can make space for the kind of work that you're doing. Yeah. I don't know.
Let me just add to that in terms of offering another term, the N-archive, which is a term that Karim Zinemans uses to describe precisely this kind of conceptual taking apart of the archive that allows it to function as a community connector rather than just as a sort of repository of information or documents, right? And that here there's a kind of embodied way in which you're using the archive. One thing that you said that I found really beautiful was when you said that you're trying not to be artists and authors, but hosts between works, places, and practices, right? And so this idea of hosting for me is a really important relational term that you're using in order to think through what does it actually mean to build these communities, to build these institutions in a sense. And for me, another direction that I think we might be able to take it, especially with many of you in the audience from the Art Schools of Asia project, is to think about pedagogies. What you're doing here is you're learning from the land, and you're learning through making. Yay. That's beautiful. Thank you for the electricity. And it's just a reminder, too, that we're so dependent upon these systems that we've built, and that we're not so separate from nature in the end either. But just the idea that with these pedagogies, you're inviting people, you're hosting your participants in these spaces. So, what does it do to our ideas about pedagogies too, and, the educational institution as an institution. So, just some ideas, some thoughts you might want to respond to, less than a question. Please.
I just wanted to add some thoughts that we have been doing also in the idea of using archives, or like what has been there before. Let's take the word out because it's so charged and so. One of the things, for example, is that looking at what, for example, we took the liberation movement in Guinea-Bissau very serious in terms of what are there in terms of practices or intentions or messages that we can transfer and still actualize. For example, just give you an example. That the leader of the movement, Campbell, he was an agronomist, and he led one of the most important liberation movements in the African continent, and as an agronomist working for the Portuguese state, he led the farm of Sobe in Bissau, and one of the three principles that he posed to this very horizontal farm that was there to produce goods for the Portuguese, for the civilized in the colony. So he proposed to change that place to three principles. One is a place for experimentation. The other that was maybe the first one was a place for horizontality, to bring together the state, the farmers, and the scientists and the traditional knowledge together into the same kind of level to discuss and to experiment. That was the second principle, and the third principle was actually a place to function as a hub of encounter from different countries of the area, or even from so a place of encounter. So we took these three principles that Cabral kind already is part of like his, let's say, disobedience project as someone still working for a colonial state, but already like preparing in the background the liberation movement. So we were like, for example, taking these 3 principles and say, how can this be useful today when we are wanting also to create a hub, a place of like that is a place of encounter of different worlds, but also in relation to the community. So like this is how we understood that it would be interesting to work with what was there before. So also the archive has been always being used. I mean, the archive, like the sonic archive, the sound archive, and also the images. Like, what can we use now? What can we take that can be interesting to continue and so in this kind of making it present, making it always, it's always about the present and being there. And in relation, just to last comment, we don't work so much with the idea of instituting, but more maybe what could be closer is the idea of an organism, because everything is based on this idea like you place something there and then organically, some people add onto it and come other ideas. So all of our projects or activities start with this. There's something that was given. There's, even if it's a resource or something from the past, a wish, a dream, and then how the organism that is present, brings it further. And so I think it's more an organism than an institution or a structure. It's not even a structure. There's also no boss in that place. It's always, there's always something happening, but it's not
It's not hierarchical necessarily.
It's also not projected before. It's not like we have a method or we have a structure that we are imposing onto, like also the place, because it's always about this negotiation, this circle negotiation, and it's of course very connected with this, what you talked about, these interlocutors, these mediators, this idea of mediating what is there in different forms.
Yeah.
So did I pass the speaking? Good.
That looks like
in relation to archive or epistemology, like what we know, how we know it, I think I really like the idea of not predetermining what that might be or the frame that we want to take to it. So as an example, here and I were a little bit resistant when we were thinking about soils, for example. There was an impulse to test them as samples of places, and then to make a sort of comparative map. I have a PhD in geography, like map making is there, right? Always there. Maps are there. So it's like, okay, should we do that? Should we wait? Because that sort of predetermines an outlook on the city that in a way we know it. We know it in our bodies. We know it, in the places that we live. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done, but how does the measuring of something like toxicity, something like nutrients or biological life, what it tells us or the frame that we approach it with will be different, will be situational, right? So, for example, Usman mentioned that we were out, the workshop happened on the day when the AQI was probably above 1,000 at the time, or at least that's what sort of the numbers were suggesting, and that is true. And there has been a big push to make sure that those numbers are visible. In Lahore, in Punjab, over the last, let's say, decade or so, there's been a big push because those numbers, the knowledge of that atmospheric contamination was so submerged itself that it was not even discussed, even though it was there 10 years ago, was there 15 years ago. But knowing that number, what is the situation around it, right? On one side, there's an impulse to isolate, right? To go inside, to turn on the machine and to wear the mask and to isolate. And certainly that's an important impulse. But at the same time, it tells us something about how our city is also separated, how the vulnerabilities are separated. But instead, we were outside, and everyone who chose to came still did that, knowing what that number was. And then a few minutes into us starting, the cyclists went by who, were there making a point of being out, knowing that number, making a point of saying, hey, we're out, we're talking about this is an issue. How, and Usman called it a battle, and how does that resistance, that battle, the kind of the struggle and the friction around what we know of as the number, what is the situation that's created around it, and what is, so anyway, maybe I'm now rambling, but what I'm saying is we may still test the soils, but doing that in relation to what that kind of context is telling us and what the community and people are telling us around it, I think is important.
Mm-hmm.
To quote you, Filipa, to think beyond the organization, to think the organism. So maybe what we can do here, and maybe a takeaway from all of the talks that you've been giving us and what the offerings are, is to really think more organically and to think in terms of the organism. How do we think through these bottom-up systems in order to understand our relationship to each other and to the land and the more than human in much more fruitful and sensitive ways, rather than imposing those structures. I think all of the projects that you've been talking about have done that so beautifully.
Yeah. So thank you all for contributing to the roundtable today, and for sharing your experiences with working within organisms or organizations, or however you want to think of them, or networks, thinking about these questions of how these larger social formations can participate in this, and in extending and sharing and teaching, right? The kind of information and awareness that we'll need in order to adapt and to also acclimate and to make ourselves more sustainable. So thank you everyone for joining us.